Now, the new boss of Qantas has acknowledged the harm caused to more than 1,000 workers who were illegally sacked during the pandemic. Nearly 1,700 ground staff were deemed to have been illegally dismissed in that High Court ruling last week. In a phone call to TWU Secretary Michael Kroger yesterday, Vanessa Hudson offered a personal apology to those workers as she begins the work to rebuild the airline's reputation.
She made a phone call, reached out and said that she acknowledged that the workers had had a really hard time. Clearly, they'd had a hard time. They'd been illegally sacked. But words are words, actions are actions. And what we need to see from Qantas is a real intention to turn over a new leaf.
Well, here we go. It's my favourite political panel, and what a news day to welcome them to the program. The former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger and former Labor Minister Stephen Conroy. Gentlemen, how are you?
Andrew, very well, very well.
All right, I might start with Michael Kroger. Give us a reaction to Daniel Mookie's New South Wales budget.
Well, mate, it's very hard to tell, but it looks like it's based on higher taxes from your interview with him. They go property developers wherever they can. Obviously, the increasing debt is a considerable burden and a worry. We acknowledge that that's not just run up by this government, obviously, but by its predecessor governments. So intergenerational debt federally in the states is going to be a big worry. But to the extent that you can tell from the forward estimates how the New South Wales economy is actually going to perform, it's still very hard to know at this time. But, net debt of over 100 billion for a state government is got to be worrying. It's over 160 down here in Victoria. So these numbers are historic highs and obviously are worrying.
I'll get to Stephen in a minute, but I want to ask you first about this, Michael, because Daniel Mookie was on about it in his speech, he was on about it in his press conference, and he was on about it to me before. This anti-privatisation religion of this New South Wales Labor government. Now, Bob Carr and Michael Egan knew they had to sell things off to pay down debt. They were very much Labor people. Morris Yema knew it. They say it's just a coalition phenomenon. And I know with electricity bills going up, etc., privatisation is unpopular at the moment. But when you've got a debt burden like that, isn't it a bit dangerous to just rule it out for all time? Any form of privatisation?
Well, it is. And in politics, you've always got to look at the long term. And in the end, I take the view that it's better for privatisations to have taken place. Not everyone's successful. Not every government's successful, Mr. Mookie. Not every treasurer is successful. So, of course, you shouldn't rule these things out. Paul Keating privatised things. So did the Victorian Labor government. So they have across the country. To basically say, I was at school when Egan was privatising, as he said, it's like, well, mate, sorry, you can't just pretend you're a numpty and, history only begins with your election a few months ago. Of course, you've got to put things in the historical context, and overwhelmingly privatisations are good for the economies because the private sector is ultimately better at running things than a government is.
All right. Well, what's your view on this, Stephen Conroy? Because you're not exactly.
It's lovely to.
I don't think you're as left wing. Frankly, I don't think you're as left wing as some of these Labor politicians we're seeing these days. Not that I'm having a go at left wingers. I'm just saying I'm surprised by the vehement. It's real sort of 1960s attitudes, almost, it seems to me.
Well, I'm enjoying the 1970s attitudes that Michael's just expressed. Private sector is better. I mean, it's just I wish you could find somewhere where that actually was true. Let me be clear. I have opposed publicly, on the record for years, privatisation of essential utilities. I think they're monopoly services, and decisions by state Labor governments, state Liberal governments over the years to put them in the hands of the private sector have been an epic failure. You've just got to look at Victoria's power system at the moment. You've just got to look across the country. States that have kept them in control are in a better position than states that have, whether it's water, gas, electricity,